I'm really pleased to welcome Mary Daly to the summer school. This is our fourth interview in this series, so I suppose we're trying to do different formats and different ways of kind of accessing knowledge, life in academy, what is the good life, and one of the senses we have is that our professoriate have at the kind of when they get to the senior deck of the ship, have something to tell us. And like, as you kind of read Mary's profile, it's very intimidating. Like it's a well-made career in the academy of achievement sedimented on achievement. And so I think it's worth excavating that as a journey and with you. As you all probably know, Mary is Emeritus Professor of History in UCD, which has a very tingliness to it. It's not an ordinary professorship, as in history has a really unique place in Irish society. I'm not sure it's elsewhere, but I think it's we were talking about the hierarchy of angels at one stage, and the economists are pretty high up the firmament, sociologists down at the base in the field, but our historians are loom large in our national conversation about who we are, and so and no more position than the UCD professorship as being our official. So
loved and hated and loved, I think.
But never ignored. so and I want to start this as a kind of gentle, implotted excavation. So I don't want to assault you by projecting a starting point. So where should we start? Or
I leave it to you. As I said, I didn't want it scripted.
Yes. Like, is childhood an important part of this story?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe no. Sometimes it comes back, yeah. I mean, I grew up spent the first 4 years in Virginia, County Cavan, not the other place. And then we moved to Carrickmacross, so that's where, I spent my school-going years. My mother was from there, my father wasn't. My father was... It was only years later I realised I was probably the only girl in my primary class, national school, whose father was a university graduate, and perhaps the only girl in my secondary school class whose father was a university graduate. He was an agricultural scientist, so he moved around.
So that's a different.
Yeah, and also small town, about 10 miles from Crossmaglen. I did
2-room schoolhouse or
what?
Something more elaborate.
What?
A 2-room schoolhouse?
Oh no, St. Louis Convent, I can assure
sorry.
you, with battlements like that. That's in the secondary school. It's if you drive through the town, you go up the hill, and it was in the old Shirley Estate House, the Bath actually, but anyway, in the town. So no, St. Louis Convent, Carrickmacross was a well-recognised school in that part of the world, not as well recognised as Monaghan, which is the mother house, which had been there from the late 19th century as a boarding school, and would have educated people from various parts of the country. So no, it was a good national school. One reason we moved to Carrickmacross, my mother was from near there, was because we were in Virginia, which would have been about a 3-teacher school or something like that.
The penny dropped at what stage that you were of this community, but the universityness, was that a gap between you and the people, or you
what
were?
Do you mean?
You said your parents.
Yeah, well, it was like small town Ireland at the time. Everybody knew everybody else. They were all intermarried. Half the people in one class were cousins of the other half, and so on like that. And we weren't. And there was a strange term in the town called runner, which I suspect was a derivative of foreigner, and we would have been regarded, even though my mother was from 5 miles outside the town, we were kind of runners. We were not in any hostile fashion, but we were seen as not quite belonging.
Right. Yeah. And was it a place that very few people did belong? Or was it?
Oh no, it was deeply ingrained. Families, many generations, intermarried, and deeply, embedded in that community. And we were just seen as slightly.
There'd be a memory of Paddy Kavanagh.
There is a photograph in one of either the Sunday Press or the Sunday Independent of the main street in Carrickmacross on half day when, you know, nothing moved. And Paddy Cavan is somewhere in the middle of the street. And there are three small objects in the distance. Those are my three brothers coming home from school. And when I was brought to the Adelphi Cinema in Dundalk for my first communion treat, tea, Cavan was at the next table, and one of my brothers, the guy's now in Nanterre, saw food going to another table and not coming to him, and started screaming. And when he screamed, veins came up, and there were pejorative comments made by the great poet. Would somebody not deal with this particular child? So, and I do remember seeing him sprawled, semi-drunk, on the steps beside the butcher shop, a butcher shop in the main street, and so on. So he was kind of part of the scenery, is the only way to put it. And my father, as an agricultural scientist, would have been able to give you, and would have given me at times, you know, Terry Eusebius is X. My father could have identified, mapped them all. And one of my brothers worked in a jam factory nearby where one of Kavanagh's sisters worked. He did he worked a summer job, and apparently the language, you know, the invective that this woman could deliver, you know, and the rich demotic language was quite remarkable. So Kavanagh was part of the scenery, yeah, he was.
Yeah, and is that a kind of good roadmap for what Cavan was like or was it the end of that?
I think the town was authentic. I remember bringing my kids to the Abbey to see Terry Flynn, and they loved it. And they announced, you know, they'd been to a play where all the characters talked like my uncle, who was a farmer, and they adored that.
Yeah.
You know, they'd never seen this before, so they were really engaged with that.
So, you know, there's various archetypes and visions of secondary school in Ireland. Like, it's a wide landscape of beautiful pastoral to closed switch.
I was sent by my parents. I got a scholarship to secondary school. I was sent to board 10 minutes walk from my house. And every now and then the school crocodile would go out for a walk, we'd pass the house, and I'd get permission to run in, and my mother was a very good cook, and grab whatever I could in terms of gingerbread and stuff like that and give them back. And I used to go home every Sunday and a friend of mine who was from Dublin claimed she would have got malnutrition were it not for my mother, but I don't think it was quite that extreme. But no, I didn't, it was fine. It taught language. I did German and French at a very good level. I did Latin, translated, it was through Irish language school. I translated Horace Odes into Irish, which I don't think I would recommend. They were never made to be translated into Irish, I don't think. But, you know, so the sciences weren't so great. But it was a good school. Some of the teachers were very good. In that sense, the discipline was okay. It wasn't particularly stringent. I just didn't like the regimentation of boarding school, and I think maybe that probably had an impact on me. And the great thing about academia for most of my life is that nobody told me what to do in the morning. Okay, you know, if you had lectures at 10 o'clock on Tuesday, you had to give your lectures at 10 o'clock on Tuesday. But there's enough elasticity in it.
Yeah.
And I think and I'm not so sure that wasn't a reaction against boarding school. I mean, I didn't have enough freedom to read. I always had books kind of hidden in places and torches. I mean, I did read with torches.
And was history part of that reading, or everything? History,
I never studied history. I never spent time sitting to study history, I think, until I went to college. It was just something I absorbed and I read. And we had a very good history teacher for a couple of years, young nun, who'd actually been in the same class as Ronan Fanning, and, you know, a colleague of mine, and, you know, she'd done history in UCD, and J.C. Beckett was the Bible, which had not got very far into Ireland at the time, but that, and then she went and she was replaced by another non-fluent, excellent Irish speaker who put us to read our history from a book by a man called Émach Dúin, Louis Cullen can tell you about, who and it was an ancient script, and all I remember from it was Cahol Mock Nadine Conachi Yeneth of Namehi, that people were displaced from the land to replace. But anyway, so I used to sit at the back of the class and read other history books when she was teaching at the front, and she knew jolly well what I was doing, but she just, and I'd throw in the odd question, to keep her happy. But I was let away with it, kind of thing, is the best way to put it. So the school was okay like that. It wasn't too regimenting.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah.
And so, was it a very natural pathway to UCD, or was that?
Well, my father was a UCD graduate. I had an uncle who was in the Faculty of Agriculture, who was my godfather, and another aunt had gone there. So my father was one of 8 children, youngest of 8, both school teaching parents, father from West Cork, mother from Clare, grew up in the Midlands.
So education was the code.
So education was there, and I knew my uncle worked in UCD, so I suppose it was part of my cultural landscape.
Mm-hmm. And you queued up at on registration day.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get into UCD?
Well, those days it was very easy, actually, so it was. And you turned up and you decided what you wanted. You literally turned up and decided what you wanted to do when you got there, kind of thing. Best to do it. And I remember going in. I went to UCD not to teach, so that's why I don't have too many great roadmaps. I mean, I went to UCD determined not to teach. So
that worked out well.
Yeah, that really worked out well. And I was going to be an economist, so I almost did become an economist. Yeah. So, and then I did history. I did the entrance call to UCD, and they gave me a prize in geography, and they didn't give me anything in history, and I was very miffed by that. So I gave up geography.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
was that Earlsford Terrace or Belfield?
I was at the very end of Earlsford Terrace.
Right.
Very end of Earlsford Terrace. Yeah. So I did history and economics in first year, and I took up Italian in first year, which was a really good idea because I learned a bit of it, and and I've always appreciated doing that. My father suggested I should do it. And I did maths as well, but you did 4 subjects in those days, and then economics I found. I liked economics and I enjoyed it, and I found history much tougher. And I at the end of first year I decided you could give up your history and go into politics and statistics, and I'd worked out if I didn't do as well in history as I did in economics, I was going to give up the history, but fortunately at the end of the year I did.
It's a real kind of tactical thinking of...
Well, I was thinking it through and so on like that, I wasn't too clear, but anyway, and I really thought I might be finishing history.
Yeah.
But I liked...
And how's that going for you?
I think it went okay.
Yeah. So, who were the big wheels in the place at the time, and what was the dynamic?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, Gareth Fitzgerald was there as a lecturer, and Gareth's lectures were dreadful, actually. You did a course of statistical sources, and there was something how you counted duck eggs in the agricultural production. Don't ask me, please. And various other things like that. And he taught us about Europe and things like that. But his lectures were really, really tedious. But he was so student friendly that everybody adored him in that sense. And he had students after the house, and he was interested in people. And he was still there at that stage. And Paddy Lynch was great in economics. Paddy was really, he was a big he was the key person behind Investment in Education, which was published some time ahead, and he was chairman of Aer Lingus, and it was all kind of things. And again, the economists by and large didn't look after the students, and that tradition didn't leave for a long time, actually. And then the historians, well, you had the great big guru, Dudley Edwards was there, and Desmond Williams and Ronan Fanning had arrived, and so it was a lively Maureen Wall, who died then far too early. She was really good. And Morgan Curtin's Benvenuto was there as well. I was out with her about a week ago. So anyway, she's 90 now, and still firing, I can tell you. All cylinders great.
Was as an outsider,
but the historians were interested in their students.
Yeah. And
you got small group teaching, and they engaged with you. The economists didn't do much of that.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have Excel. They didn't have Excel at the time, but they desperately needed it. I always felt Gareth Fitzgerald missed out on that. like from an outsider, okay, and I,
Mm.
reading it, the scene, there was a big transformation in that time in in how history was done.
Mm.
Is that a fair reading of it, or?
I not really know. I mean, they worked out back in the 30s or so what they wanted to do, and they had a certain dogmatic approach to it, and they didn't change it that much. I mean, the only difference is they come in is they start going in to look at the 20th century, and that's one transformation. The other thing that was part of the history ethos was that you had to be internationally qualified. I mean, if you were to, and there were tensions. There were one or two people around the place who hadn't gone away, and bluntly, if you wanted a career as a historian, you had to leave the island and get a qualification. I mean, most of them went to Cambridge and most of them went to Peterhouse, which was the most conservative college in the place, and so like that. So, but there was an assumption that you really had to go overseas, and that wasn't that common at the time. It wasn't there in Trinity, for example, at all. They were all inbred, never left the place, from the age of 18 until they were carried out of it. But the UCD historians particularly had this, that you had to go and get trained.
Why do you think? Why, like, again, going back to my pigeon understanding of it, it might be very unfair, but like Trinity was a container for the Orthodox Irish history.
I don't know. I would dispute that. I mean, the thing is, you had Irish historical studies, which had Moody and Edwards as, and there was always tic-tacking between the two, so there was. And, I mean, Louis Cullen arrived in Trinity when I was an undergraduate, and I think Louis, I would regard as, actually, Louis did a great job down here. He'd tell you the whole history and culture of this whole area brilliantly, linguistically and every other way. He'd be wonderful. But I mean, Louis was, quite a pioneering, really fine scholar. And I remember going down to Trinity to listen to some of his stuff, and so I know I would dispute that. Yeah. And some of my best friends, I mean, David Dixon would be one of my best history friends going back a very long time. So no, I wouldn't go there.
So it's not two camps.
No, it wasn't. And Roy Foster spent a lot of his undergraduate time hanging around UCD. So and married a UCD student. So basically, there was the history students conference, and people. So it wasn't two camps, is what I would say.
Right. And but you struck out to do doctoral research then.
I did my BA, and then I did a master's in UCD. There's a thing called the NUI Travelling Studentship, which was set up back in the 19th century under the old Royal University, and there is a book that lists, and it basically gave you money to go wherever you wanted to, as long as you left the island, basically, or I think maybe the state, but anyway. But you had to sit a brutal exam to get it. I had to sit it. I was the only contestant, but I still had to do it. Effectively, you did your finals again, and you had to produce a dissertation, and you had to do everything. But anyway, so I was entered for that. I was like the thoroughbred horse that had to be put in for this, and so I did a research master's, which turned into my first book, which is on 19th century Dublin. Many years later, I mean, I did it. It was all, and nobody had done any social.
That was your UCD work.
That was a master's thesis in UCD, right. Much reworked and extended later, but and there was nothing there. I mean, I was literally, you talk about starting on there was just nothing there, and I think I was apparently the first person to use the Dublin Castle Chief State Secretary Office records to see what social history was in them, and the answer is lots of cholera and lots of other things as well, But so I did that, and that was a 2-year, and I was tutoring. I tutored economics.
So at that point,
so I was
your work was social history, or you?
Yeah. I mean, I just started. I got interested in that, and I decided to do it.
Was that from the economics?
It was, yeah. So I did a 2-year master's, and year 2, the historians decided to see what I was like as a lecturer. So I actually got a lecturing job as a junior temporary assistant. They'd done it with Joe Lee, and to see how he fare, and they thought that was a good idea, and they decided to do it for me. So I actually lectured for starts, day and evening, including an evening class where there was a whole gang of army officers, most of them old enough to be my father, and a very elderly priest who was an ex-British Army chaplain in the middle. I told this story some years ago, and then this voice at the back said yes, and I was in the audience. Which kind of, but anyway, so I did a brutal year actually, and I did the travelling studentship, and I also then had to get a language at honours level, so I sat first year Italian. So I sat in the RDS surrounded by my students, sitting first year exam, and all the young lecturers who were invigilating came down and said, "What are you doing?" I still remember people coming down to look at what was I doing here. So I did all of that in 1 year. In 1 year, it was brutal, and then I got married at the end of the year as well. And then went to Oxford.
And like students now talk, or
Yeah.
postdocs and
Yeah.
students at that place talk about it as a precarious time. Was it a precarious time, or was it always a sense you'd be fine? And
I don't know that I knew where I was going, but which is probably just as well. And I didn't realise that, I think it was many years later, Mary O'Dowd worked out, I was only probably the second woman historian to go on studentship to from UCD to study abroad.
wow.
Which, I mean, and I'm glad, you're better not knowing those things actually. You're actually better not thinking. I mean, one thing is that I would say is if you over determine things, if you over reflect, if you over absorb the difficulties of what you're doing, you might just be paralysed by it. And so I think in that sense, so I went to Nuffield College, Oxford. I went to because I'd met Kenneth Connell. He'd come to hear me give a paper at a student conference, and I'd met him a number of times afterwards, and he was a very fine economic historian. He did the early demography work and very good essays in Irish Peasant Society, and he was a really charismatic man. He was also manic depressive, and sadly that finished him, and he said, "You must go to Nuffield." So I applied for Nuffield, which doesn't take in historians technically. It admitted 3 strains of students: economists, political scientists, and sociologists. So I got in on the sociology intake, and a lot of other good historians got in. I mean, my version was that we were there to keep standards up in politics and sociology, and it was extremely privileged. There were 20-something fellows and about 50 students, graduate only, and you had your own study, whatever travel grant, the money, you had your own phone in the days when students didn't have landlines in their offices and this kind of stuff. So, and what was good about it was that it was very mixed. There were Italian students, a lot of Americans, Canadians, a few Indian students.
What was the academic environment there?
Oh,
was it an exciting place? Or?
Gentlemanly. I thought I'd get supervised, and I didn't really. You were left to your own devices, which in many ways isn't the worst. I mean, I've seen people who got wonderful supervision, but then what happens to them when they grow up and they get their PhD and there's nobody to mind them? And I've done an awful lot of promotion rounds in UCD, and that's where. And and good scientists have not say, "Oh yeah, but look at, he's only published with his supervisor. He's not, he's not taken off. He's not yet independent." So Oxford was great. It was very well. First of all, it was very misogynistic. I mean, I'm not saying UCD was a paradise of feminism or anything. It wasn't. But it was. Nothing arose. I mean, I was told going into coffee one day by a man who's still alive, political scientist, that every time they admitted a woman into Nuffield, they kept out a perfectly good man. So I hope he's done okay. And that really the women who'd gone to Nuffield hadn't done nearly as well as the men. So I looked back, and there were about 200 and something male Nuffield alumni at that stage, and there were about 20-something female, and we're all much more recent. So, and Oxbridge was really, there were the women-only college, the graduates' colleges were the only ones that were mixed at that stage. It was a very strange place. And seminars were very hierarchical. I mean, there was one we used to all go to in All Souls, and And unless you had professor in front of your no, you didn't have to professor, but unless you were a venerable scholar, you might as well put up your hand. But you were generally not listened to. So we set up our own seminars. And it was that kind of place where we just did our own thing actually. And I think a lot of what I got out of it was pure learning. I mean, wonderful library, and a lot of pure learning from the crowd you hung out with, and that was good. Yeah. And what I liked about it was that it wasn't too subject, the demarcation lines. I mean, I was hanging out with people who were between, politics, sociology. My doctorate's in politics, actually, because history at that stage in Oxford stopped around 1914. And I mean, it's not for nothing the place known as the home of lost causes, but so I've a doctorate in politics, which I didn't let on at UCD for about 20 odd years, but just in case somebody get worried. But so basically, I think what was good about it was the community and the peer. But I mean, I tried when I set up the Humanities Institute in UCD, I was trying to replicate some of that, and so that was good.
You touched on the Dublin work, which did you carry that forward in Oxford,
no,
or
no,
was it fresh
no,
work?
there is this gap there's this thing in my CV. I wanted to work on 20th century material, and the kind of 20th century records I want weren't open in Ireland yet, so I worked on British social policy. I've a DPhil on the depressed areas of Britain in the interwar years, long-term regional unemployment. I know lots about South Wales and others, Lancashire and all these kind of places. I never published it because of just combination of family pressures, being back in Ireland and everything like that. But so I worked through a lot of that. It has strangely impacted on other things I've done, but it's one of those strange things in the CV.
And you lived there for
We lived there for a couple of years. Then my husband got a job back in Ireland, so we moved back, and then I got a job in UCD. I was very fortunate because I think there wasn't another job for money. The money, the short.
Yeah, the hot coals.
I mean, it's one of the tragic problems of academia. There's all these. If you go through, there's all these missing generations, and then it opens up and so on like that. And it's not just in academia. It's really bad in Ireland. You can get in the civil. I went through this with you can get in the civil service. You can get it in the higher echelons of the medical profession as well. Whole generations where there was no hiring being done, and
we just put another one of those generations down.
Precisely. Yeah. But it's I thought for a long time it was only in academia, and then I discovered from conversations with others that you can detect it in whole sections, and it does very strange things. So it does anyway.
So maybe we start delving into the work a bit more, and when you came back after the kind of political science studies, what kind of themes animated you? I know it's a busy time in life, family and home.
Yeah, it was.
And work.
And I mean, my first child was born at a stage when there's no maternity leave, this kind of thing. But it's interesting. But again, the place was flexible. You just negotiated around with your peers. That you took a bit of time out, and you took some you were let off tutorial by your colleagues and this kind of thing, and you doubled up lectures. You found an empty slot in the timetable, and you doubled up your lectures, and and you did it without say so or anything. It was all a bit. In that sense, it wasn't the worst. I set out to try and teach, to try and put together a narrative of Irish economic history from the Union, and I wrote that textbook, that economic social history, really, which was the book of my class, the best way. And then I did other things. I did a whole series of courses, not always ones that I went on to write on. Did lots of stuff on land at one stage with students because I could get good documentary material. Did stuff on education and schooling. I did various things, but I mean the syllabus in UCD history was high politics, and more high politics, and more high politics. Medievalists were a bit different. The medievalists did more diverse stuff actually. I mean Howard Clark, who also taught me, was doing things like feudalism to capitalism and bringing you through. I mean, you read Mark Bloch, you read Dubin, you read all this kind of stuff, and you were introduced to Brodel and so on like that. But the historians was very mainstream high politics, and I suppose I was pushing against that.
And in the pushing against that, were the modules that had to be taught that were picked up, and then
Well,
you put
well,
shape on them,
well, there was a
or
bit. There was a bit of flexibility. We put together an Irish history course for 500, and it was worked out. I mean, it was Ronan Fanning, Donald McCarthy, and myself for a long time, and we worked out that the students had to get a diversity of stuff. So, and I was put in first to give them the economy and so on. So they got demography, they got land, they got the famine, they got all the rest of it. Stuff they wouldn't have done properly at school. So this was deliberately put in to shock them and to take them out of their comfort zone, and that was quite deliberate. So you go and deliver that to 500. And we also introduced, and they hated it, a module, a section in Irish Unionism. The course was divided 4 ways. I think Rona must have done 2 of the 4 or something like that. But anyway, and they were given a mandatory set of about 5 or 6 lectures on Irish Unionism, which they got from 1800 up to whenever the course ended, in probably 1970s or something like that, almost to the present. So they were introduced to Northern Ireland and this kind of stuff as well. And they bitched about it, because you tutor them. They bitched about it, but they got it, and I think it was very good for them. And a lot of them rose up to be heads of government departments, cabinet ministers, TDs, all kinds of other things, media people. But they got it. So I mean, we deliberately set out to kind of just deal, just destroy that comfort zone.
There's 2 really interesting things. Like everything there was interesting, but the undoing the work of secondary school history.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah. But first of all, I mean, they were always convinced. I tutored economics and I tutored history in that year, and I was a much better tutor of economics. They almost all got honours because you could get them taught on, you know what I mean, on the principles of international trade and so on, at least at that elementary level. You can't teach history in the same way. But the students were always firmly convinced that we had the answer to the question.
I'm convinced you have it.
and except the trouble is we wouldn't give them the answer, whereas we don't. To try and get across to them, there's ways of looking at things, there's ways of analysing things, testing the evidence, querying the evidence. But this was a regular tension that you got. The other thing we did a lot was small group tutorials with people, so you'd argue those out, you'd go through their essays, they'd argue back and so on. There was a lot of that. We also had, the other thing that was very good is we had, I would teach so-called documents course, so you'd have a class of, it was supposed to be technically 10, but you'd often drift up to about 18. And you'd have 2 hours a week with this crowd, and good interactive teaching, and they do projects for you, they do papers and all the rest of it. And it did give them very, I think they were none of the principles of T&L that you'd get nowadays and learning outcomes, but I think they got a lot out of it. I think we taught them well. And I think a lot of them would say that.
That's the second shocking thing you said. The potency or agency of history. Like the history of now that's being written. And did you have a sense of that when you were putting that course together, that this would have a unique power in our society, that type of teaching and that reformulation?
I think there was some awareness of that there. I think there was an awareness. Ronan particularly would have been heavily, Ronan spent a lot of time hanging out with, foreign affairs people et al. And there was an understanding in UCD that UCD history, for example, produced, just has produced several Supreme Court judges, several cabinet ministers. There's something, I got dragged into something recent years. What I got dragged in? Charlie Flanagan did history in UCD. And Charlie Flanagan knew me. Yeah. And that's why I got dragged in. So,
is he still trying to impress you?
What?
Is he still trying to impress you?
No, he's not. But basically, the point is that there was an understanding in UCD history that the graduates went into foreign affairs, went into government, went into the media, went into politics, went into the legal profession. And so I think there was, and that you. So I suppose in that sense there was a sense that you were forming their. You were helping form their minds, and that was very much part of it. And bluntly, you can go around, and I do meet students in all kinds of places still. Strange. I mean, I was down doing something once in the courts as an expert witness, and there was a young solicitor from one of the big firms looking after me, and several people came over to shake hands, and this was kind of senior counsel and judge, and he was saying, how do you know all these people? And I said, they all did history in UCD. I said, in our days, only the thickos did law. And he looked at me. And he was horrified. But he couldn't, but basically the point, we assumed we were, that there was an assumption that this is what the place, what UCD history was doing.
Okay, and did you feel you were carrying on a tradition, or you were making it in front of people?
Oh, it wasn't just continuity. No, it had there was an element of continuity, but there was a strong dynamic in it as well.
Like
there had to be.
The themes of your work in, I suppose in the city, Dublin, as the kind of first thing, the urban studies, and as an odd city, as in.
Oh yeah. I mean, the only thing on Dublin that I was looking at that stage was the Georgian architecture, and there's so much more to be done anyway.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that, so I did, yeah.
How did that work came out of your masters, but you carried it forward then throughout the 70s, or was it?
No, I redid it. I mean, I when I came back, the first thing I did was get that general economic social history under my belt, because it was more or less what I was teaching, and then I went back to the Dublin stuff and got that out, so I did, and then I moved in more into the 20th century stuff becoming available. But I mean, I did part my way into all kinds of places. I mean, I had various connections, partly through my husband, who wasn't an academic, and I managed to get into the basement of Industry and Commerce in Kildare Street, and I got a book out of that, looking at what was happening in terms of industrial policy in the 20s and 30s. And I mean, I'd go down there. And I was at a meeting there recently in the place, and I said to whoever I was with, I said, is there an office in there? And he said, yes. He said, that used to be my office. I said, I had that office at one stage, when I was a researcher. They gave it to me. It was vacant, and there was peat briquettes in it. And if there's no other heat, and if I'd had sufficient nerve, I could have lit the fire there, but I never bothered. And but I used to go down to the basement, fill a trolley with stuff, and I was not free to open boxes. These were the older files, and they'd bring it up, and then I'd work through, and they'd bring it down again. And I remember deciding there was so much stuff on film policy, Mike, you'd be glad to hear, that I reckoned anybody who'd been landed from Mars would think that Hollywood was upstairs around the corner. But anyway, I don't know whether it's still there or not. And I remember once spending a morning there and getting particularly interesting but dirty files, and there was stuff sticking to my hair. My whole skin was itching. I really should have gone home, had a shower and washed my hair, but I had to go out and give my I'd done the morning there. I had to go out and lecture in UCD for the afternoon, so God knows what I looked like. But so I mean, I got in there, and that book was nearly finished, and I bumped into somebody else, and he said, there's stuff in finance, would you like to see it? So I then migrated into the basement of what's now the AG's office, and worked there, and so I kind of I managed to get in and do that kind of stuff anyway.
Yeah, and you've even written official biographies of departments.
Oh yeah, I was asked to do that one, yeah, and yeah, I worked in the basement of the Custom House as well, so I did for a long time, and then at one stage I briefly had a gorgeous office overlooking the Liffey, so I had, but not very long. Yeah, I mean, some people raise questions about my doing that, but I was trying to put building blocks in place that would open up questions that other people could then begin to. I mean, I was actually trying to see some of that as building blocks. So
you had amazing access to those sites.
Yeah, I did.
That wouldn't be available to other researchers.
Well, I think if you'd asked for it, you would. Yeah, I mean, what do you call him? Brian Griffin got access to certain fair amount of stuff I got in the basement of, I think there was good flexibility in those days about giving you access to stuff. It can be still there at times.
And the tensions that were present in that period of history that you kind of engage with, do you maybe want to say a little bit about that?
Well, I suppose
the city Dublin up to the war period, First World War period, and then the foundation of state, development of industrial policy and agriculture, and the various themes that you've pulled together.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm interested. You know, some of this was bouncing back off, I suppose, contemporary Ireland, which you know was very much changing, and the tensions between urban and rural living, and Irish. I mean, there was an awful lot more. I don't know. You might comment on it afterwards, Michael. There was an awful lot more navel gazing about, you know, Irish identities and those. I think we've given up on that. I think we just decided we're here, and that's good. And I mean, I've been thinking about that recently. That I think we're much more relaxed about urban versus rural, you know, agricultural versus what. But there was this strong belief. It's not unique to Ireland when you get to the States and you get that the manifest destiny of the Irish people was to be on the soil, of the soil, and you know, and and you know, to really resist modernity, so much modernity, and that created all kinds of tensions. And I mean, I've looked at that through demographic stuff. As you know, my slow failure book looks into that as well, and so it's one of the themes that does interest me a lot. But as I said, I think we've passed that phase. I think we've lost interest in that. I think we're at ease on certain aspects. You know, not everything's right in Ireland today, but there are certain things that we are now at ease about that we weren't in the past.
No, you seem to enter into these spaces that are very contested as a historian, and you're surfacing other voices. So kind of manual workers, or women, or labourers, and these voices that are written out. And you said it earlier, the kind of political history has already been there and has put its tent out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there would have been a strong canon within UCG that high politics was.
But is there a sense your work undercuts a lot of that high politics?
Yeah. It was. In that sense, I think I was deliberately pushing against some of the convention within the place.
Yeah. And did you get a response? Was it?
Yeah. The assumption was I did that, but some of the students would say that I wasn't doing the real history or something like that, and the others were doing the real history. We got through that.
I suppose, is there anything along that journey that kind of stands out for you? Maybe it's a very unfair question but I suppose it seems to me from this remove, from the mid-80s, you were producing very substantial pieces of work that intervened into existing almost settled debates, or debates that and
I suppose the only thing I'll say is I probably kept moving, because there was invariably something that would come to my attention when I was working on that seemed worth exploring. So by and large, when I was 2/3 the way through something, I could see where something that I wanted to go look at next. It was never terribly well planned, but there were things that you just stumbled across that seemed interesting and that you wanted to go look at. And the question was accessibility. A lot of there was a lot more archival material becoming available, but it was also a matter of just deciding to go root and see what's there as well. I mean, I suppose what I'd say to people is don't get over schematic. Don't overly plan what you're doing and where you're going next, because if you don't allow for the unexpected to come into the scene, you're going to lose out badly. And it's one of the things that does slightly worry me about, you see people proposing a research proposal or a PhD thesis, and beautifully presented, beautifully set out. You know, where's the space for the unexpected in this? And the other one is the really dismissive one. If you know all this and you've a beautiful town already, what's the purpose in doing it? Because you seem to already know where it's going. So I think what we need to do is leave ourselves space to go where you hadn't planned to go. And that's why I always tell students, don't just go to seminars that are bang on your area. You will learn a lot more, and you will have a lot more inspiration from going to something that isn't bang on your area, and you'll be there, and this isn't really my thing, and somebody will say something, and they'll say, oh. And that's where you get much better ideas.
And did you find yourself in hot water for those new ideas ever? Like, I suppose I'm kind of dancing around what I thought was your perhaps the most radical piece of work on the famine.
Yeah, that was done. That was done because Art Cosgrove asked me to do it in a series. Michael Laffett had done one on partition. I did it very quickly. I did it at a difficult personal time. I'd lost a baby, and I had a semester off, and I sat down and I wrote that book. I also lost the first chapter of it. The written version of the first chapter of it, I retyped onto one of the first Apple Macs in Ireland, which I had access. My husband worked with the IDA, and there were one or two around the place. It was brought home for me to just play with to see how I got on. I mean, I had it over the Christmas holidays, and I put the revised version of the chapter into it, and the machine was a complete con. It went in. It could never come out again. The disc was sent to Cork. From Cork to Cupertino, where a Corkman looked at it, and they couldn't get it out. I mean, they couldn't get it out, but they were selling a pig in the poke at that stage. So anyway, I mean, I can remember the famine one very clearly. I wrote it at a certain time. Would I write it differently now? Maybe. I would. I don't know how. I mean, I've gone back and worked the famine again in different ways. I oversaw a big project with Cormac and the late David Fitzpatrick and the two Davids and Cormac Rother in the 90s. I did it. And what a lot of people don't pick up from it is that I suppose the version of the famine that really gets up my nose is the cuddly landlord version, I'm afraid, and the bad British government. No landlord in Ireland went bankrupt because of the famine. A lot of them go bankrupt and their estates are sold in the 1850s, but they were on the threshold of bankruptcy before it. And in one sense, what the more radical aspects of British government policy were trying to do in the famine was stick it to the landlords. And the landlords managed to duck, and the Irish poor got in the neck. So my interpretation is actually quite Marxist in a way, and as opposed to being apologetic, I think you could write it in a more subtle way. But bluntly, it's this cuddly landlords during the famine, I mean, that really, really makes me sick. It's still out there. It's still out there in certain quarters, and it was the way that they managed to duck and weave and so on.
You said Marxist, but is it more a concern for social justice in history?
Perhaps, but what it really is that the policy we put in place were trying to make Irish property face up to its responsibilities. And they weren't. I mean, they ran the poor law unions to put their own people on the public works. They put their own people into the unions. They clear the land and all the rest of it. The other thing is a lot more stuff has come out since. I mean, certainly the eviction statistics. There's an awful lot more delving that you do into the micro thing, and the eviction story changes when you do that, and that's quite important as well.
And did you feel that book got the response it deserved?
I don't know. I've odd attitudes towards it. I suppose it's probably the piece I've written that I'm least comfortable with in some ways.
Yeah, I can see why. So maybe, what work do you feel most comfortable with? What work out of all the various projects, and you kind of describe it really beautifully as these kind of happenstance.
I like my slow failure book, I must say.
Yeah.
I like that one. So I do. It's looking at debates on population or
Mm-hmm.
urban migration and so on. Like that. I like that. I quite like that book. So
Yeah.
I quite like that book. I'm fond of that book.
So do I, actually.
I'm fond of that
Yeah,
book.
and that's become our dominant way of understanding that period of time.
Well, yeah, and I mean, there's more. I mean, you can keep that, but I like that. I'm happy with my '60s Ireland one. I thought, I'm very happy with the '60s Ireland one for one reason. It was the one I thought might never be finished because I'd started it and then I got dragged into senior management in UCD, not by pre-planning, and when you're 7 years and that kind of stuff, I had to at some stage say you're not going to get it finished because I couldn't keep all the balls in the air while in the bits of free time I had. So I just had to park finishing it until I got out of the job, and that's. There's always the fear that you won't be able to get back into it again and so on like that. I mean,
Yeah.
I always kept something. There was always something on the boil, and there was always something coming out. But
Is that a sacrifice then? What have we lost because of those 7 years?
well, I was. It wasn't a job I went for. I was on the search committee to send a signal to people that I didn't want the job, and then it wasn't filled. And I obviously by the so the next day Hugh Brady sent for me and said, "I'd like you to take it." I mean, when the phone call, when I got the message, the president's office is looking for you. What time would it suit you to meet him? There was only one thing. There was only one way to read that. So I said, okay. I mean, I just said, to hell with it, I'll do it. And for 1 year, and then once I got into it, I ended up there for 7 years. It was supposed to, 7 years of a 5-year term, so I didn't get remission, obviously. But I mean, I remember when I was asked to check it on, I went to go and talk to somebody who was an agricultural scientist who I liked, and who he was head of ag at the time or something like that. Very nice man. And it was more that he was sufficiently arm's length that I just wanted to run things past. And he looked at me and said, whatever history you write won't matter nearly as much as what you can do. So I said, thanks for this vote of confidence in my history, Morris. But anyway, so I did it. But so God knows what book hasn't been written because of that. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway.
Circle back to one book you skipped over, which was The Place of Women in Work.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was a short one, and I mean, there's enough. I mean, I wonder, do I need to go back and do another one on that? And I don't know. There's a directory on my computer, but I don't know. I think I'm doing a history of family planning in Ireland at the moment, so I am when I get spare time, and fertility decline, and I'll have a full. I'd say I've about 90% of a draft of it, so I have, and and a lot of it's in revised draft. So I would hope to get that in sufficient condition to send off to somebody by the autumn.
Wow.
If I can get enough spare time, but I don't know. The question is, will I go back then and do women wear? I don't know. I think I want to do something different.
And maybe to draw you into the content of that a little bit.
Which one? The women one?
Women one.
Yeah, I mean, when I was doing Slow Failure, I think in V1, version 1, there would have been a chapter on women, and then I said, no, you're not doing a chapter on women. You're going to integrate women, and I suppose what I've tried to push is integrating women into the historical narrative as opposed to writing women's history. I did a seminar. I did a session once in UCD, and somebody told me some of my graduate students came and said, you were very brave there, because it was the problem with women's history, and I said the problem with women's history is women's history. And bluntly, you're partitioning it off. We make a huge thing now about transnational history, if you like. So, why not transgender history? I mean, I don't mean transgender in the conventional sense, but why not history that brings in, both the masculine and the female experience where it's relevant, and to look at them in a holistic manner. So I deliberately, when I was writing that book,
is it possible to do something like that? Like to look at something like that from where we are now and transcend this?
I think we
time.
Must do it, and I think you can do it if you take, what I think you need to do if you're looking at anything is, say, where, what's the woman dimension in this that isn't there, or what's the masculine dimension in the other, and I think you have to do it. So I think what you need to do is you're looking at a problem, a theme, an issue, and then I think you need to stand back from it and say, hang on a moment, is this being looked at from only a female perspective or only a male perspective? I prefer to see it done that way. If you're working in social policy, are you looking at it in terms of the gender dimension? So I much prefer it's the same way as you may need to do religion from or north a transnational. So I think really to require yourself to do that. And the trouble is, because if you keep writing women's history, some people will read women's history because they read women's history, but you want to get the issue, the debate into the whole story, into the broader story, which will produce richer. It also prevents distorted.
And like those projects are very unique to you, and you're like, as you became more senior, you then end up doing more edited volumes of things that are spun around you to a certain extent.
Yeah, well, some edited volumes just ended up on my lap, not necessarily by choice. I mean, Roger Casement, I became secretary of the Royal Irish Academy, and they'd had this casement. Bertie Ahern made a speech at, he was then the Irish teacher, made a speech at Arbor Hill. And I was working at home the next morning, and my dear friend Paddy Buckley, who was the executive secretary of the Academy, rang and said, Mary, have you read your Irish Times today? And I said, yes. And he said, did you read Bertie Ahern's speech? So I said, no, I skipped that bit. And he said he's called on the Royal Irish Academy to do a forensic analysis of the Casement diaries to discover whether they're... So he said, what do you think we should do? And I said, we have to say yes. We can't just... So there was a conference, and the conference was, I think, just after I didn't set up the conference, I just became secretary. Then it was decided to edit it. So Muckins here ends up having to edit the volume, and I thought there were some gaps in the programme, so I brought in extra people, and then I had to deal with it. But there were stages I used to go around saying, I wish Roger Casement never existed, and so on like that. But, so I then became a Roger Casement expert, not by choice, Yeah. Which was interesting in various ways, But so some of these things you just take on, but
so the further you go up, the less freedom you have to set your own agenda.
You have some freedoms, but and then there's other things you have to do, which is different. You get this really interesting idea, and you say to this really smart graduate student, why don't you look at that? And then at that stage you have to stand back and say, it's hers, it's not yours, it's hers, and you can't poke too far into it. She'll do it differently to the way you might have done it, but it's hers.
Maybe that's an element we should explore, your students' work.
Yeah, I've 30-something, I think about 33 PhDs supervised to completion. I've got one a bit in art history, so I ended up taking over. There was a crisis, and there was somebody in History of Art in UCD doing a thesis. Fortunately, it was on nothing too esoteric. Albert Power, who'd done a lot of political stuff, so I supervised the thesis. And then I did external supervisor for the Royal College of Art in London on another thesis. So I've done that. I
told you I was intimidated at the start. I'm now just thoroughly.
Yeah. I have a couple of intriguing things like that. So I've supervised about 30. It's 30-something. Yeah.
And has that been an important?
Oh yeah, I've always enjoyed it. I've enjoyed most of it. I mean, I used to say to people, PhD student isn't for Christmas; they're for life, and they really are. They really are. It's just for Christmas for life. They really are. You get the odd rough one, and then you get some where you feel you've almost done nothing, because these are people who can be just left to it.
Float away on their own.
And then there are others where you're more interventionist. So you have to.
And have you put shape on them as?
Yeah, sorry. In what way were you going to ask?
Like, shape? I suppose, are they working in your tradition?
Some would, some wouldn't. Yeah, some would, some wouldn't.
Is there how do you decide between that, or is there a tension between that, or?
Not really. I mean, some will work on topics that are not quite, where you'd be going, but and then some, I think, I think people would see my stamp on some of them. Yeah.
You talked a lot about your colleagues and your partners and in projects and that.
Mm.
Is that just, was that I wasn't cynical obviously, but I suppose, was there a plan to that, or is it just?
No, the whole tradition would have been the sole, the sole trader. Actually, that would have been the tradition, and did a couple of things. I mean, Cormac O'Grada, myself, and Arnold Horner set up an interdisciplinary seminar in UCD at one stage, and then that kind of just fell apart. I've done various things with David Dixon, and not much pre-planning. It was just something that we worked together, and I remember we were trying to get some famine studies going, and we needed resources. In some ways, it's an awful pity we didn't do it later, because I think if it was in a more digital age, we could have got an awful lot more out of, much more bang for our buck. And I remember the person who guided us in that was Tom Devine, a very fine Scottish historian, who retired from Edinburgh. He was in Strathclyde before that, and we were trying to piggyback with Tom on how to do things, and then the two Davids, David Dixon, David Fitzpatrick, Cormac and myself, all put together a proposal and managed to get government money behind it, which was, I think, the first time the government had put any money into historical stuff. But that was hard. That was a tough effort to get there. But so I suppose I did think, David and myself did a book on literacy, which we published between us, and between us we ponied up some of the cost of getting the book out, and got some money out of UCD and Trinity. So I did various things like that with people, and it was all very ad hoc, and funnily, none of them were my colleagues in history.
Right.
Really, yeah, I don't know what it was just really the way it worked out. And I enjoyed that. I mean, I remember doing team teaching. I think if you had more resources to do team teaching, it can be very gratifying.
Yeah.
But adversity and cutbacks, these are the kind of things. But ideally, if you can put two colleagues into a room and a group is, it can be really enriching if you can do it.
So just before we leave UCD behind and onto the out there, you've been in UCD for a huge period of transformation in it. And,
oh yeah.
When it was a small college, or relatively small, and you knew everybody, to when you ran a large division of it.
Yeah.
What's your feelings and hopes and aspirations for the university? And
I think the real problem in the university world at the moment is the humanities. Actually, it really is. I mean, there's a ghastly paper I read recently. It was online on the New York Review of Books, with whom I've been having a huge row. I got nothing for 5 months. I mean, I've been a subscriber for years, and I mean, I told them to send me another email saying valued customer. I would deal with them accordingly. But anyway, there was an online piece. I mean, the numbers going into major in various humanities subjects in Harvard and places like that are scary. Really, really scary. And so I think the real fear is for I do have a fear for humanities within the university, and it goes back to we were talking over thing about instrumentalism and so on, and I really have fears about that. And in an age when we were much poorer as a society, people would do a degree in history and something else, and then go and study law. Whereas now, they will go and study law, and they will not do the degree in history or math. I mean, Frank Clark, the current Chief Justice, has a degree in maths. BA in maths and something else, and which is great. And this kind of perplexes me, that people in the days when resources were less bountiful, people who might be going on into a profession would actually go and learn something first before they took on this profession. So I do have concerns about the place of humanities in the modern university. I do think that if you get to know the good scientists, and I speak of this mainly partly because I would have known a lot of the top echelons in UCD in latter years, and but also through the academy. The good scientists are not our enemies. They are people that you can genuinely exchange. You can trade ideas with. They believe, and you can have conversations about basic research, and their ideas of basic research are not very different to our ideas of basic research. They're going in to work out. They've got a problem, an issue, something, and I think we need to make friends with. I would say make friends with scientists, actually, because I think there's some very good people there who understand ideas, who understand research, and who understand inquiry for the sake of inquiry, not quite knowing where this inquiry is going to end. But
are we getting further away from that with our ever bigger buildings and our bigger campuses and the more space?
Well, you see, it's all very strange. And it doesn't help us because the perception, parents come to universities for graduation, and they come in and they see these gorgeous buildings, and they say this place is dripping with money. And of course, donors always want to give you a nice building which can be called after them. I mean, Anya Gibbons, who ran the development office in UCD, she's now with the College of Surgeons. I mean, the phrase I learned from her, the gift that takes forever, because they give you this building, you then have to keep it painted, heated, upkeep, so, the donor gives you this, and you have to maintain it as they want it forever. She's quite cynical.
Yeah.
But so I think there are all kinds of tensions. I think the spins. I mean, first of all, I'm a great fan of international students in all kinds of ways. I mean, some of the best classes I've taught would have had a good diversity of students in them. But this business of bringing in a full fee paying students, to cross subsidise, you're getting into very dodgy areas. There is potential corruption in terms of grades and everything like that. I know, I'm speaking from experience, not my own personal experience, but somebody very close to me. I'm very, very concerned about that. And I mean, what's happened with Brexit is I've a brother in Brussels, and he's on the education scene, and UK universities have lost all interest in Erasmus because Erasmus students don't bring any money with them. They bring, I think, great value added, wonderful value added to the place, but so they're only going for the full paying, and hang Europe, I mean, so I think there are serious concerns in where things are going. Yeah.
I suppose in our final few minutes together, before we ask for some questions and responses, you've ended up, or you've been sought out for very important roles.
Yeah. I've one of the books. Yeah, you have it there. There was, after the aftermath of the Good Friday Agreement, some years later there was a call for North-South Research Project, and very short notice. And I'd always been interested in the 1966 commemoration of the Easter Rising. I have vague recollections of it. I was at school. My younger brother got pneumonia as a consequence. My brothers were in a boys' band in southern County Monaghan, and they played at every windy and wet cemetery in County Monaghan, I suspect. They played, because there were commemorations for all kinds of things anyway, and my youngest brother got pneumonia as a consequence. But anyway, so I had vague recollections of it, and you got all the simplistic thing, and this triggered the troubles in Northern Ireland. And I said, let's see what I found out. So a very short notice, Margaret O'Callaghan, who was a UCD history graduate, and we were fairly friendly, she was behind me, myself, put together the whole thing anyway, and we got the money to get that commemoration book out, and but that was it. I mean, I didn't do the history of 1916, if you like, and then, by virtue of doing that, once the expert advisory group and commemorations was set up, I was dragged into it, and then I've done an awful lot. I mean, I did commentary on RTE on Easter Sunday. I've done the Queen, the Pope, and Easter Sunday 2016. So I have, and O'Donovan Rossa, and what else? Arbor Hill, a few more. But basically, so that kind of dragged me into the space more, and I suppose my inherent interest was more from the commemoration point of view than from the other. But we're still working on it. I was at a meeting government buildings there on Tuesday, and we're still at it, and we're working out how do we handle partition.
The harder ones are coming up.
Oh yeah, we'll get there. I mean, to be honest with you, 2016 was really good, and I mean, I think we were all very scary going into it, and I would have been too, but it was really good. And I'll tell one story about that. As I said, I grew up in County Monaghan, and later that summer I was at a wedding of a cousin, and the cousin, it was daughter of a cousin, but obviously a cousin as well, but anyway, a cousin school teacher, so a lot of there were friends of Mother the Bride, and so there were school teachers from County Monaghan around, and kind of 11 o'clock at night saying, "Oh, we saw you on television, on Easter Sunday, that was great." But then one of them said, and this is the remark I've quoted ad nauseum since, she said it was wonderful. And the big moment was when the army came into the school and presented the flag and the proclamation. And she said, and this is a woman, probably in her 50s, she said there were many decades there when the army couldn't go into those schools. And it was great to see the army there, And I mean, I was really touched by that. And I think we handled it pretty well as a country. So we're going on warily, but I think we're okay. And I think we've reached maturity about an awful lot of these kind of issues. And I think it's a maturity that allows for diversity. It's a big tent, and I think it does allow for diversity.
Is that an activist historian? In a certain sense, a project that's, you described starting in the potency of the undergrad classes.
Yeah, it is. But it's and there's sometimes I feel that one reason why we've come through it with a degree of maturity is that deep down a lot of the historical understanding that was hammered out. I mean, I'd say when I worked with Hugh Brady when he was president of UCD, and then I'd say, "Oh yeah, former student," and then, "Yeah, former student." Yeah, and at one stage I think he thought I was fantasizing about these former students. So I said, "Hugh, I've lectured at least 10,000 people. So kind of they can come at you from all angles, But in other words, I do think, I do think that there's trickle-down effects from a lot of that and getting out into the wider culture, and it's very slow at seeping through, so it is, but you can do that. And then, of course, the other great project I have at the moment, which is the one that some people really get all the happy ones, which is I'm commissioner investigating the mother and baby homes. And why did I get that? I was very slow at the uptake. I was president of the Royal Irish Academy, and then secretary of the department said he wanted to the story broke, wanted to talk to me and show me terms of reference and all the rest of it. And I assumed he was just looking for expert advice on the terms of reference. Penny didn't drop. And then some months later, you get the request, will you serve on it? And so, I mean, I decided I couldn't say no to it, really. And then Charlie Flanagan, the two of us were launching a book. He was Minister for Foreign Affairs at that stage, and said, "Come here, man, have you agreed to help us?" And I said, "What?" I said, "The Mother and Baby Commission." And looked at him and said, "Yeah, I told them they had to get you." But that was a former history student. So I'm 3 days a week on that. I've written at this stage, you can all hope you won't have to read it all. I've written about 250,000 words. I'm not doing any of the institutional chapters. The powers that be landed 250,000 pages of digitised material on us this Friday before Christmas. That was on top of other dumps of stuff on us. So, I mean, it's major, and we've whole teams doing all kinds of things. It's major, and it's almost unending. It's incredibly interesting.
does it speak to the kind of complexity of apology, commemoration?
Oh boy, does it what? Yeah, complexity, I think, is the word I would use. Complexity is the word I would use. Yeah, complexity. And I think it faces. I hope at the end of it, people will learn something from it, and I hope that they will look in many cases into their own hearts and into their own families and see what people did. I mean, I've got some wonderful stuff, and the stuff that is like gold dust is where you get the contemporaneous descriptions, and just the woman writing in the 1970s to some organisation, "Can you get me out of here?" That's a provincial town, not 100 miles from here. It's like Coronation Street, and she's a single mother, and she cannot walk down the street without them all. Or the woman describing her mother going to the shops and knowing, and she's kept the child from home, and that everybody's looking at her and pointing at her and all the rest. And somebody else saying, raising her child, and she's saying, yes, the other kids play with my kids, but the mothers are very distant. And these are the kind of things we need to start facing up to. And I feel sorry for the Protestant community, because they can't blame the Catholic Church. And the issues are no different. So I think there's a lot of heart searching we need to do.
And the matter of your own historical investigation has now caught up with your own career in the overlap of the 70s.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Probably, anyway, yeah.
So it's hopefully a more happy one. Like, you were the president of the Royal Irish Academy for
first woman
in forever. And
no, it was 3-year term. It was busy. It was great.
Yeah.
I enjoyed 90% of it. There was the mad. I mean, do you remember the man we had to get barred? Yeah. There was this crank who would show up regularly. I can just summarise I'll give you a small capsule. Newton was wrong, Einstein was wrong, Higgs boson was a fraud, and many other things as well. Apart from that. But what?
That was for starters.
That was for starters, yeah. So I mean,
a bouncer for the Irish Academy.
We got a barring order eventually.
Wow. But I suppose, do you have any reflection from that kind of unique purview on the state of the Irish Academy and the position of scholarship in our society?
There's some positive and there's some not so positive side. I mean, we did significantly increase the numbers going through PhD students some years ago, and it was never expected they'd all go into conventional academic careers, nor could they. And there are more people with advanced qualifications, holding down doing more diverse things in Ireland today, and I think that is to the good. I think it's been partly successful. But what's scary at the moment is there's huge talent out there, and it's not quite clear where it's all going to get a home. Now, I could be philosophical about it and say I can remember earlier generations when there were people, and they were all, I mean, the history corridor at various stages would be full of kind of semi-employed people, and then they'd be cleared out. I have seen earlier generations say move on in various ways into meaningful roles in society. And I'm just hoping there's an awful lot of people. I mean, I've got 4 PhDs, people with PhDs working as researchers at the moment in the Mother and Baby Commission. I mean, they're doing great work. But that's a good finish, So I mean, and they're all excellent. So I mean, the there is an issue of long-term sustainability. The other issue that's really serious, and it's not just for us, I mean, I've seen it for the really top scientists as well. There was something I did there recently. Continued research funding. I mean, the quality of the ideas, the intellectual potential out there is incredible. And the interesting questions out there are incredible. And I'd just like to see more resources going into it. And please, a bit of breathing space. Let somebody go and see where that idea is going to take them. I mean, I remember years ago a very good friend of mine, Alwyn Houghton, a very fine historian, saying, well, way back in, I can't remember when it was, somebody told Simon Schama, there's money, go off to the Netherlands and see what you can find. And she said nobody would do that nowadays. And one might argue that giving Simon Schama his head was of great benefit to society, and Simon is somebody. I mean, I overlapped with him in the Centre for European Studies in Harvard, and I'd say one thing about Simon. Simon was superb with students. I mean, there's some mega people who fly all around the world and they don't seem to give any time to students. Simon gave to his students, so he's a good man. But basically, I'd just like to see in our wealthy world just some resources given that would allow people to follow, be it in a lab, I mean, I'm not drawing demarcation line, I'd just like to see a bit of space for that. And I do get worried about the overly schematic.
Yeah, and articulated throughout that eloquently that we've left so much behind. But is there anything?
Not really.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much.